We're back on the Power Play. You know, if you've been watching television or reading newspapers in this country in the last couple of weeks, you've been watching a real war going on between the cable operators and the broadcasters. Cable operators are saying that the broadcasters are making lots of money. They've got a great product out there, and they certainly don't need something called fee for carriage, which is whereby the cable companies would pay the broadcasters money to take their signal and sell it to you, the viewer. Now, on the other hand, the broadcasters are saying they're in very rough shape indeed. They're closing stations, and one major broadcaster in this country has already filed for bankruptcy. So that's the essence of the war, and a not-so-disinterested observer of all of this joins me now, Heritage Minister James Moore. Nice to have you here.
Good to be here, Tom.
What do you make of this big fight between the cable operators and the broadcasters?
Well, certainly there's a great debate going on. I mean, characterize it from time to time as a fight, but there also are some areas of common ground. And an area of common ground was an area on which our government moved today, which was the issue of Part 2 fees. Part 2 fees is a licensing fee that's imposed across the industry. When I was named the Minister of Canadian Heritage about a year ago, the unanimity of opinion across between everybody in the industry was that the issue of Part 2 fees needs to be addressed by the government. So we addressed it. We signed an agreement today to forgive owed Part 2 fees in the past, which means $450 million in fees in the past that are now not going to be collected by the government. That's immediate cash relief for an industry, as you said, that is experiencing a lot of stress. And future Part 2 fees are going to be capped at $100 million.
And most of those savings go to the cable companies.
Well, everybody will benefit by it, cable companies included.
You've seen the books and you've listened to this argument. I mean, because now Canadians are being faced with this choice, the competing ads and competing claims and so on. Who's right?
Well, our focus, I think the dominant focus of the government always has to be the consumers. Consumers have to come first. And the question of fee for carriage, as you know, is being examined right now by the CRTC. CRTC has hearings that are ongoing. They're going to be really intensifying in the coming few weeks. They're going to finish their hearings before Christmas, and they're going to report to the government sometime in the early new year. And once we have that report, we'll have a full set of information. But what our government has always decided is that while this information and misinformation campaigns are going back and forth on both sides, the focus always has to be our first responsibility is always the consumer and what serves their interests best, which is why we asked the CRTC to broaden the focus and scope of their consultations here and to put consumers first. And so that'll be a key element as the government decides this policy.
Haven't you also taken on this issue yourself politically by removing some of the key decisions from the CRTC and put it into the political arena?
The examination is entirely at the hands of the CRTC. This is a CRTC issue. They will report to the government early next year, and it'll be an issue that the government will be wrestling with. But I can tell you that this is not a new debate. There are entrenched sides on this, but our focus is absolutely the best interests of consumers, which includes, of course, the best interests of industry. These are symbiotic, mutualistic benefits here, but the needs of consumers absolutely must come first.
I guess when consumers look at that and they say, okay, I can understand on one side, cable companies are telling me I'm going to have to pay more, there's going to be a new tax, as they call it, or whatever, for this fee. It's not really a tax, but it's a fee. The broadcasters, on the other hand, are saying, well, where the consumers are hit is when TV stations get closed and there's no way to get local information into local communities and so on. That may be a little bit less visible, but are both of them right in terms of, if you're looking at it, let me put it this way, because you want to look at it in terms of the consumer. Where does the consumer hurt the most in what the cable companies are claiming would be an increase in a tax, or the shutting down of TV stations in Canada?
Well, if the choice was that simple, I think we'd have a more easy debate. But I don't think, frankly, it's quite that simple. There's a lot of things the government can do. We have the Canada Media Fund, which creates Canadian content, which goes online. We have simultaneous substitution. We have regulations through the CRTC. There are a number of things that the government does in order to support broadcasting in the country. The issue of fee for carriage, or as the CRTC is proposing this new approach, this value for signal idea, is going to be a source of very intense and very serious debate. And I know that is something that you've had in your show in the past, and your show and other forums are going to be an important source for debate on this subject. And the CRTC is going to have very thorough hearings on this, where we have asked them to make sure the consumer's interest is put first, and that kind of a question dynamic will be part of the debate. They'll finish their report and their consultations by December. They'll report to us in the new year, and our government will react accordingly. But our first concern is consumers, and as you're right, though, we want to have diversity in content. We want there to be a strong content across the country and Canadian content across the country. We want to have a strong and vibrant industry, but we also need to make sure that, as cable companies and broadcasters seem to be duking it out, that the interests of the average citizen and consumers and their cost of living and their desire to have diversity in content is also protected. So the consumer's interest, in our judgment, can't be lost in this debate.
You know that a couple of the smaller TV stations were put up for sale, and a couple of the cable operators said, well, I'll buy those for $1, and they backed out of all of the sales now. Is that indicative that small TV in this country is not sustainable right now, when even the cable operators say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I can't make $1 off of this thing.
No, not necessarily, because I think if you look at the Jimmy Pattison Group in British Columbia, they have a very different view on, for example, fee for carriage. They're doing well. Other companies say different things, and other stations are saying different things. All part of the debate, all very healthy. But I would say as well that if you take into account online content, multimedia content, podcasting, video content, all the ways in which people now are getting information, there's never been more choice. The television industry, the traditional television industry, is in serious trouble. There's no question about that. So the question is, what's the responsibility of the government? In my view, the responsibility of the government is to work together with the partners, deal with issues like Part 2 fees, which we did today, $450 million in immediate relief for the industry, a cap on a fee going forward, and then to work with the CRTC to listen, find out what the debate has to offer Canadians, and then take appropriate action in the new year.
Just a final question. It's coming back to something I asked you earlier, and that was when you decided that the ultimate decision on this is going to be up to Cabinet. And this, Canadians are going to be watching this just because of the amount of advertising that's out there, and so they get engaged. But in the past, normally the CRTC, an arm's length organization, makes these decisions. This decision is not going to be at arm's length anymore. Is that undermining the CRTC in any way?
Not in the least. We as a government have a responsibility to Canadians first. CRTC is an independent organization. They're undergoing their consultations. All we've asked, we're not undermining them in any way by asking them to make sure that consumers come first with our Section 15 intervention. They will make a report, and then they'll deliver it to the government, and we will make a decision. The elected government will make make decisions that are always in the best interests of consumers, which we've done today on Part 2 fees, and which we will always do when it comes to funding and protecting and ensuring that Canadians have diversity in content, and also that consumers' interests are always first and foremost in our minds.
When's this war going to be over? When are you going to make up your mind?
Well, we'll listen to the CRTC hearings. We'll get their report back, and then the government. Well, we'll get the report back, and then we'll make our assessments. And Tom, you'll be among the very first to know, I assure you.
I want to be the very first one to know. James Moore, Minister of Heritage, thanks very much for being on here. Always good talking to you, by the way.